Hello Everypony, I'm Permissive Adele, and thank you for tuning in to another one of my audio readings. Today I'm going to be reading Octavia Takes the Bus by The Dorkside 99. Now this fic was recommended to me by the Bobman772, who posted a comment on my YouTube channel, and since then I've looked at the fic and I absolutely adore it. Now this doesn't mean I've forgotten about any of my other projects like the Steadfast Sky, but I figure since A Night to Try to Remember is over, I can start another fic. Also, a big thank you to my brother Dr. Beak, who does not one, not two, but 3 male voices for this part, which I think he did magnificently. And one final shout out to all my awesome subscribers, without whom I'd just be a nerdy girl posting videos on the internet. Not that I already am, but at least I know I'm loved. So without further ado, here's the introduction to Octavia Takes the Bus by The Dorkside 99. Octavia gasped in disbelief. 6,000 bits! Are you joking? The mechanic dried his hooves with a towel and shook his head.
Afraid not, Missy. Your transmission's completely shot. It'll need to be replaced.
But 6,000 bits is preposterous. Isn't there any transmission out there that's cheaper?
I'd say.
The mechanic replied.
This here model's a rare one. 6,000 bits is just my own estimate, and even that might be a bit too low.
Just exactly how much is the original cost of this car? Octavia asked. I may as well purchase another if a replacement transmission will cost me that much.
Once again, your guess is as good as mine.
The mechanic excused himself and walked into the restroom facilities of the car shop. With a heavy sigh, Octavia looked up into the bottom of her car, suspended several feet in the air, the drips of grease from the engine causing her to shudder. The intricate design of hard metal parts set the cellist's mind into a confused daze, and ultimately a frustrated attempt to make sense of her troubles. With the biggest concert of her life only 2 weeks away, the last thing she wanted to worry about was how she was going to make it to practice without her car to take her on the 10-minute trip to the Canterlot Music Hall. All of her musical compatriots would be too busy preparing themselves for the concert to give their poor immobile friend a ride, and at least, in her mind, public transportation was not an option. Octavia's thoughts were interrupted by the mechanic appearing at her side, looking into the car's underside with an inquisitive eye.
You know, I know a couple of ponies who can take this heap of metal off your hoof for a pretty penny. That is, of course, if you're willing to sell.
Octavia sighed. I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. This heap of metal carries much sentimental value for me.
I completely understand,
said the mechanic.
I myself got a '67 Mustang I'd never part with. Only good thing about it's shell, but every time I look at it, I see my late wife.
Then you'd understand if I could ask you for a tow to my apartment? The mechanic smiled.
Absolutely. Just let me lower the car and lock up the place.
The large towing truck rumbled down the streets of Canterlot's high-end district, disturbing what was rather a peaceful silence, which Octavia was used to this late at night. The tall street lamps filled the lonely night with a yellow light that spilled onto the cobblestone streets. Not a single pony was found out on the streets as the two made their way towards a luxurious apartment complex.
Boy, you sure look like you're living the life, said
the mechanic. I suppose, replied Octavia. At the gate of the apartments, Octavia reached out of her window and punched a code into the number pad, which opened the golden gates of the complex. The mechanic slipped the truck back into gear and drove the giant machine into the complex, ogling over the several beautifully trimmed bushes and trees that lined the pristine sidewalks. The glow of the moon danced across a large shimmering pool and illuminated a desolate tennis court and full-length basketball court.
What I wouldn't do to live in a place like this. Shoot, I'd like to retire like this if I could, but I like what I do way too much.
The mechanic let out a raspy laugh and slapped his thigh. Octavia smiled politely and turned her gaze into the starless night. She never thought of her apartments as living the life, as her excited mechanic put it. It was only a temporary housing arrangement until the concert. She determined that as long as she gave the performance of her life, it would pave her the life she had always dreamed, a life with millions of adoring fans showering her with red roses and thunderous applause, a life full of expensive jet flights to Equestria's most prestigious music halls and theaters, a life of bottled champagne every night and the smell of fresh linen every morning, a life where she'd never again have to deal with apartment life and car troubles, the life of a famous musician.
Well, here we are, Missy.
The voice of the mechanic broke Octavia out of her trance and back into reality. After pausing a moment to unlatch her seatbelt, she hopped out of the tow truck and made her way to the back to assist the mechanic in pushing her useless car into the narrow parking space.
Ooh-wee. They make these spaces any smaller, we may need a little elbow grease, if you know what I mean,
said the mechanic. Carefully, the two ponies pushed the car into perfect position between two posts that held up the lighted awning of the covered parking space. As soon as the back tires hit the sidewalk, Octavia let her head drop in relief. Playing cello for 10 hours a day, though strenuous enough, did not prepare her for the exertion of force that pushing her inheritance on 4 wheels required. Opening her eyes after a few moments, she noticed a black stain on her pink bow tie from pushing so close to the front end.
"Oh, for Pete's sake, what else can go wrong today?" she mumbled.
Don't look too bad if you ask me,
said the mechanic.
I always come home covered in car grease.
"Well, of course. I mean, you're—"
The mechanic turned his ear to Octavia.
Say what now?
"Never mind,"
she said, brushing off her bow tie, doing nothing to the stain whatsoever.
"I'll just have to make a trip to the dry cleaners tomorrow after practice, that's all. A minor inconvenience when taking everything into account."
The cellist pony reached into her cello case and pulled out a genuine leather wallet from a small pocket and proceeded to pull out several 20-bit bills. The mechanic stood, dumbfounded by the sheer amount of bills that fluttered carelessly in Octavia's hooves.
"So, how much do I owe you for the tow and ride?" she asked.
The mechanic shook out of his daze and smiled.
Don't you worry your pretty little face about a thing, Missy. It's on the house.
"Oh, don't say that, old stallion," said Octavia. "I want to repay you for your services. Besides, you look like you could use—"
The mechanic stared at the normally well-spoken pony as she stumbled to find the correct words to finish her comment on the old stallion dressed in a ripped jumper. As if reading her mind, the mechanic tipped his hat and flashed the pony another smile.
Oh, I understand now, Missy. You're thinking I'm needy just because I ain't got as much going on as you do.
Octavia jerked her head and gave the old mechanic an embarrassed look.
No, that's not at all what I meant. I mean, I want to help you out, that's all."
Nah, I don't need any more money than I got now. I'm perfectly happy the way I'm doing. In fact, can't tell you how I'd be any happier, except if my sweetheart were still around.
"I see." The two ponies stared at the ground for a few brief and silent moments as their minds wandered off to better times of their lives. For the old mechanic, they included days with his late and beloved wife. For Octavia, the moment she would hit the last and final note of her flawless piece that would mark the beginning of the best times of her life. The mechanic finally looked up, reached into his hat, and pulled out a business card to hoof her.
Well, I must be going back. Hope everything works out for you. Give me a call if you need anything.
Before Octavia could respond, the old mechanic stepped into his tow truck, and, with a flick of the hoof, the large beast of a machine roared back to life. He maneuvered expertly out of the narrow parking lot and pulled out back into the streets of Canterlot. Octavia stood the entire time, watching him drive further and further away until his tow truck became a speck in the dark purplish night.